Hey cats, it's Eddbud back with a review of a Saucony shoe. This time it's the blue as you can get, Saucony Endorphin Speed 3. This shoe has evolved over time and has been a popular model right from the start, but is it still moving in the right direction? Let's find out. Welcome back to the channel, cats. I appreciate you tuning in. If you've yet to do so, hit that subscribe button, but also click the bell below for notifications when I launch the new videos for you. It really helps us out too if you give this video a thumbs up like, but also share it with your running buddies. Dankeschön. A third version of the Saucony Endorphin Speed here. This is number 3. I feel a little bit like Keanu Reeves right now. This is a shoe that Saucony have sent over to me for review, but they're not vetting my views before my valued viewers get to see them. In my UK size 11, US size 12, the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 clocks in at 260 grams. So that's 9.2 ounces if you like that sort of thing. Now, the midsole stack in the heel is a little bit odd. I have measured this, plus the previous two versions of the shoe. I actually find that this one's slightly lower, in fact, than the Saucony Endorphin Speed 1 and 2. I'm getting about 40 millimeters in the heel. Don't worry guys, I'm measuring it from inside the shoe using some calipers and other sorts of apparatus and stuff that I've botched together. So it's an approximate figure, but it's certainly a little bit lower than the 1 and 2. Only by a millimeter or so, but you'd expect it to be perhaps the other way round, where the foam's sort of squashed and compressed over time in the older shoes, but that's not the case. We've got about an 8mm drop here because I'm getting about 32 millimeters in the forefoot. This is the Ocean and Visi Gold version, or as I like to think of it, the Ukraine version. It's certainly very characterful. I'm not entirely sure that I really dig the paint on the midsole, but it is what it is. I have, though, had lots of comments from people that have seen me running around in the shoe, and they said how great it looks, so there we go. What do I know? We will start, as always, with the upper first. Now, I'm finding the toe box to be a tad wider here in the Endorphin Speed 3, certainly over the 1 and 2. There's a whole plethora of ventilation holes here in the toe box, and on the lateral and medial sides of the upper. The tongue's a little bit wider and a little bit thicker than on the version 1 and 2, but I've also found it to be a tad shorter. The one on the V2 was actually quite long. There's certainly enough coverage though from the tongue around the top of the foot to protect it from the lace pressure. Big change here in the Endorphin Speed 3 is that external heel counter here. It's quite rubbery and plasticky. A few people I've noted online have mentioned that they feel it's a little bit too high. I can't say I really felt it all that much. It's not really that present, but if you suffer from any Achilles problems, then it could be a bit of an issue for you. Just something to bear in mind. I have found that over the miles, the uppers started to give a little bit more. It did take a little bit of time to settle down. I did have to cinch both sides of the upper quite close to the middle really to get a good lockdown here. It does seem like there's quite a lot of upper material. A little bit like a Hoka, I suppose. That might be dream stuff for you. I have a normal width foot, normal sort of volume foot. So if you've got a wider foot, you're in luck here. Though I cannot help but think it would be better to have two versions of the shoe, perhaps a normal width one and a wider fit, just so you're catering for all runners really. There are a few overlays on the upper of the shoe, one of those in the toe box area, and then you've got these Saucony logo overlays on either side. They're very light, very flexible, and they don't really add an awful lot of weight to the shoe. I think the one in the toe box is really just there to provide a little bit of structure, as is the one here that's just around the back of the foot in the heel. It certainly still feels like an Endorphin Speed model shoe. There's a few slight tweaks there, and all round I think it's actually a bit of an improvement. Always felt like that was one area of the shoe that just could benefit from a few little changes here and there, and I think we've got those this time around. It's still an upper that does lots of things, and it does them very well. I'll give it a 2.6 out of 3 for the upper after my initial runs. Midsole, midsole, midsole now. I've got to be honest, there's a softer squish here in the Endorphin Speed 3 over the previous two versions. It's ridiculously squashy. Yes, there's more miles in the V2, but it's firm compared to the V3. Maybe it's something to do with the paint that they've put on the outside, but it's certainly quite different. You certainly get a smooth transition here when your foot strikes the ground, and I am wondering whether Saucony are experimenting with the formula they've used here in their Power Run PB foam. Perhaps they're looking to further improve the ever-forgiving nature of that material. Maybe it's down to the re-sculpted design of the midsole in this new version of the shoe. I'd suggest it's more closer to that brittle version of Zoom X that we saw a while back. perhaps in the Vaporfly Next Percent Original or even the 4%. I certainly did hear the crunch and the crack of that Pebax material as I took to the road. It did settle down after a few miles, but I did have a bit of nostalgia there, remembering when I first utilised that foam. It felt good on some higher paced reps at 200 and 400 metres. I've got to say, I found the Speed 3 really assistive going up some hill climbs, and then very stable underfoot when coming back down the hill. Is that something to do with that new plate? Well, could well be. I gotta say, I was never one to find the Saucony Endorphin Speed 1 or 2 particularly unstable underfoot. I think the slightly expanded width in the midsole of the shoe this time round is something that I perhaps didn't really need. Maybe a lot of other people required it, but it's not something that was really high on my list of changes that I would wanted to see in the Endorphin Speed 3. Now, a big change here that everyone will probably want to know about is those expanded blades here that you can actually see through the midsole. They appear to wrap around the midfoot area of the shoe. It could be that all of these things have had a bit of a bearing on the improved stability that you find here. The shoe feels very assured on foot strike, but still feels light and nimble. So it's a lot of things. I'm experiencing a lot of sensations here in the Endorphin Speed 3 that I'm really enjoying. So like the hallmark of the series really, it just does loads of things very well, and I can say it still is that shoe. Makes it an extremely versatile model, but at a slightly higher price. Now, this shoe weighs the same as the V2, but there does seem to be a slightly lower stack in the heel. So what have they done here? Have they perhaps removed a little bit of the foam there and perhaps put it more sort of into the heel in terms of width? It's certainly wider in terms of the forefoot and the heel. It's almost like a centimetre extra in both of those areas. It does feel a little wider actually inside the shoe as well, so perhaps if you found the Speed 1 or 2 a little bit too narrow, I think you'll be okay in this one. I think all of those things expand the intended use case of this shoe. You could race in it, you could run a marathon in it, you could wear it for your easy days, perhaps your sort of daily use and frequent use shoe. It just handles a range of paces really, really well. As such, it's certainly an improvement over the V2 midsole for me. I'll give it a 2.7 out of 3 after my initial runs for the midsole. Outsole now. That was an area that I felt was a bit lacking in terms of the V1 and the V2. It was certainly durable enough, but I just felt that in wet conditions the traction just wasn't quite up there with some of the other models that were around at the time. Traction pattern appears similar here in the V3, but actually there's a couple of additions that really improve things. I think the expanded amount of surface area here in the outsole will improve traction in wet conditions. It certainly provides some really propulsive grip and grab on my initial runs. One issue that I think may become a little apparent here, specifically in this colorway of the shoe, is that there's a lot of exposed midsole here, and I think that as you use the shoe more and more, some of the paint's going to peel away a little bit, leaving the white midsole underneath. Well, that might not be a problem to some of you, it might be a real issue to others. The XT900 rubber that we saw in the 2 previous versions of the shoe remains here. I found that to be incredibly durable actually. It hardly wore at all over 100 miles in the other 2. I think it was more implementation of where the rubber was last time. I think Saucony have nailed it this time around. I do like the slats in the toe off area here. They're slightly off center on an angle, and I found I got some really good propulsive toe off, so a big improvement here. Though there is the cost of potential midsole wear quite quickly, I would imagine. In this colorway of the shoe it's going to be quite apparent. I'm going to give it a 2.7 out of 3 for the outsole after my initial runs. Garden Centre. Value now. So value wise, this one retails for 165 Earth credits here in Great Britain. Now that's certainly a slightly more expensive shoe, but I think due to the Swiss Army nature of this one, it practically does everything really. You could just buy this shoe and do everything in it. Well, I don't think you should run on trails in it. I don't think that would be a good idea at all, but it pretty much does any road or pavement style running, and it will just lap it up like a hungry squirrel. I mean, it does a lot of the things that the Endorphin Pro will do, but with a slightly more forgiving and less rigid plate. But how do other shoes with a similar price match up against this one. I think the Sen 8 from Adidas feels like a race flat in comparison, and it has a huge weight advantage also over the Speed 3. Certainly a more foot-hugging profile in the Sen as well, so I think this one's probably going to be more useful to you on a daily basis perhaps. Not sure I'd want to run a marathon in the Takumi Sen 8 either. The Tempo Next Percent from Nike, although a more expensive shoe, perhaps again not that useful for daily use, and it's certainly a more aggressive feel. It's one I want to put on to run some much faster miles. The Zoomfly 4 from Nike, a much firmer cushion underfoot. Well, they do get a carbon plate in that one. It's got a more hefty feel and a far less squashy midsole than what we got here. As such, I think the Speed 3 is in a very special niche area. Could be a higher pace training shoe for you. I think it actually works quite well if you're doing some repeats where you've got some recovery in between. Could be a daily cruiser, maybe even a marathon shoe for you if you're going to race one of those. I think it's quite hard to score this shoe down in terms of value. It's certainly one of the better ones out there for that, albeit at a higher price. I think if you add it to your rotation, it will get lots of miles and very quickly too. I'll give it a 2.7 out of 3 for value after my initial runs. So if we totted the scores up correctly, that gives us a 10.7 out of 12 after my initial runs for the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 down in the comments. Is this one you're going to be picking up soon? A long video today, so a very quick musical interlude for you. Listening today to Television's Marquee Moon. I was really lucky to pick up a very early vinyl copy of this in mint condition a few summers ago. See No Evil's always been one of my favourites. It really introduces you to the Television sound, which is intertwining guitars and almost jazz-like drumming at times. Big highlight track is obviously Marquee Moon, but I really enjoy the track Friction. I like the strained vocals and the really interesting intertwining melodies. There's some beautiful guitar tones as well on this album, and the bass always complements what those guitars are doing. If you've never heard of Television before, I suggest you go and check them out. Fantastic album, Marquee Moon. Thanks for tuning in, people. It is always appreciated. Help the channel out by hitting that subscribe button and clicking the bell below for notifications. Also, if you've got a question you want to get directly to me, you can support the channel too with a super thanks. Hit that like button and also share this video with your running buddies. My name's Eddbud, and I'll be seeing you